Deep in California's Sierra Nevada mountain range lies a small, remote hunting camp that's existed since the 1950s. Despite its long history, it's only a handful of people know exactly where this camp is located. According to its members, the fastest way to reach it is by horseback, an 8-mile ride through rugged, unforgiving terrain. The trail climbs nearly 4,000 feet in elevation, twisting through thick forest, and it's never the same twice. Fallen trees and shifting topography force the path to change every year. One of the original camp members, Ron Moorhead, often says he wishes nobody had ever learned about this site at all. But keeping it secret was no longer an option. Not after what they discovered there in late 1971. In early 1971, a young Ron Moorhead was invited to the Sierra camp by the 3 founding members. When he arrived, he was instantly captivated. It was pure wilderness, untouched, pristine, overlooking a breathtaking valley surrounded by towering white fir trees. A freshwater stream trickled nearby, and deer were plentiful. For a hunter, it was paradise. The only real drawback was the large bear population. But the men were prepared, carried firearms, and had built a sturdy shelter from fallen timbers. When bears wandered too close, they'd retreat inside, shut the door, and wait it out. On calm nights, they'd sleep outside in tents beneath the stars. That autumn, Ron returned to camp with the other 3 members. They'd spent the day hunting and were gathered around the campfire, talking and relaxing, when they suddenly heard a low, grunting sound echoing from the forest. At first, they assumed it was a bear, but when they stopped to listen, what came next froze them in place. They heard 2 distinct creatures, producing sounds unlike anything they had ever encountered. Deep, resonant, and intelligent. The men bolted into their log shelter, slamming the door shut. Ron later recalled, as these creatures were howling at each other out in the forest, we were huddled inside, looking at each other like, "What is that? Has anyone ever heard that sound before?" Nobody had. Moments later, they heard heavy footsteps, something large running toward their camp. Through the narrow slats of the shelter, they peered out into the darkness, just beyond the light of the campfire. The running stopped, and then the tone of the sounds changed. The creatures, now positioned on opposite sides of the camp, began communicating. It wasn't animalistic anymore. It almost sounded human, a bizarre, gibberish-like language that mimicked human speech but made no sense. Terrified, the men stayed silent, listening to these strange voices circling the camp. The beings moved around behind the shelter, staying just beyond the firelight, never showing themselves. The men huddled in the center of the shelter, as far from the walls as possible. For hours they listened, the creatures circling, calling, grunting, and speaking in that unnerving, almost human language. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds changed again, back to the same growls they'd heard at first, and then the creatures ran off into the forest. At dawn, shaken and exhausted, the 4 hunters packed up and left immediately. But Ron couldn't let it go, became obsessed with what they had heard. Determined to find answers, he convinced the others to return to the Sierra camp, this time bringing a tape recorder to capture the sounds. That night, they decided not to hunt. They stayed close to camp, waiting. Hours passed in silence, until Ron heard it again. Footsteps, far away at first, then closer. Running, the men sprinted into the shelter, locked it behind them, and Ron pressed record. The recording that night became one of the most famous unexplained audio clips in cryptozoology, now known as the Sierra Sounds. The tape was analyzed by Dr. R. Lynn Kurland, a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Wyoming. After extensive testing, Kurland and his team concluded that the tape was unaltered. It hadn't been edited, dubbed, or doctored in any way, and whatever produced those sounds wasn't human. The vocal range reached frequencies both higher and lower than any human voice could naturally produce. Based on pitch and track length, Dr. Kurland estimated that the creature responsible stood between 7'3" and 8 feet tall. Further analysis came from Scott Nelson, a retired U.S. Navy crypto-linguist and language expert. Nelson confirmed that it would have been virtually impossible in 1971 for the men to fake the recording. At several points, the tape captured both the hunters' voices and the creatures' voices simultaneously overlapping in real time, something that couldn't have been achieved with the limited tape equipment available in the early 1970s. Despite countless efforts over the decades to debunk the Sierra sounds, the recording remains authentic and unexplained. No definitive evidence has ever really identified what was recorded that night. After that second encounter, Ron Moorhead stopped hunting at the Sierra camp, but his curiosity, or perhaps his obsession, never faded. Over the years, he's returned multiple times, determined to uncover the truth behind those voices echoing through the trees. Yet even after decades of research, interviews, and field expeditions, Ron admits, "To this day, I still have no idea what's out there." The Sierra sounds remain one of the most compelling pieces of unexplained audio captured in the wilderness. A mysterious language, inhuman vocal ranges, and a handful of terrified hunters deep in the mountains, bearing witness to something they could not explain. Whether the sounds were made by an undiscovered species, a hoax beyond its time, or something else entirely, the truth still waits somewhere in the forests of the Sierra Nevada.